Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week we're going to mix things up a little bit. It's going to be the first off-panel book club, a potentially recurring theme on the show where myself and a guest look back on the previous month in comics, what we loved, what surprised us, what was weird, the biggest news, and one big discussion topic. And the first guest of the debut edition of Off-Panel Book Club, in which we'll look back on November, is Zach Jenkins, the guy behind Xavier Files and the co-host of the Battle of the Atom podcast. Thanks for coming on, Zach.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
So before we jump into the overall book club chat, I want to start with like 5 minutes on who you are and what you do so we can kind of, we can get your bibliography out there so people know what kind of perspective what you're coming from. As I said, you run Xavier Files. It's a site where you have like the definitive ranking of all X-Men ever. You have a whole bunch of articles on there, including a great article today about what the hell's going on with Wolverine, and your podcast, Battle of the Atom. How did that come together? Like, why was that something you wanted to do?
So what ended up happening is around 3 years ago, I was sitting around at my kitchen table eating breakfast and just thinking to myself, I enjoy comics. I love doing this stuff, but I had an itch to create something. I had an itch to do something with it. And I enjoyed writing when I was in high school and doing all this stuff, and just said, you know what? It can't be that hard to start a blog. So I did that, and it surprised me and took off. I wrote some terrible articles about Rachel Gray and Glob Herman, which set up my entire aesthetic right there. Is the first two names that come to mind. Okay, Rachel Gray, got it. Glob Herman, perfect number two. That's everyone's second choice for X-Men all the time.
I don't know if there could be a bad article about Glob Herman.
You'd be surprised. I wasn't good at writing. I wrote that while watching Ohio State lose to Michigan State in a very big football game that got me very mad. So the quality was not there. But long story short, all that stuff kind of took off, got a little bit of a following among X-Men fans who are very passionate. I don't know if you've heard about that. They have a lot of opinions about a lot of things, and they will not be afraid to tell you about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But that kind of took off a little bit, got involved with some creators, getting some interviews, talking with them, and I decided about a year and a half ago to kick off my own podcast, Battle of the Atom, where me and my co-host Adam Reck go through every X-Men story in the history of X-Men stories, and we decide which one's the best, which one's the worst, and everything in between, including just some weird stuff. Like I had to read the Wolverine Witchblade story that Chris Claremont wrote. Wolverine and Witchblade get married in that, and they do not get divorced at the end.
Well, I mean, so technically he's still legally married to Sarah Pazzini.
Yes.
That's amazing. And I can't believe I just actually remember the true name of Witchblade. Good job by me, I think.
Yeah, no, that tracks. That tracks. But I mean, for me, I love X-Men stuff. I got into comics a little late in life. Like I went to Universal Studios back when I was maybe 11, and I went to the Marvel area, and the only souvenir I wanted was the Essentials copies of X-Men, those old black and white reprints they did. So I got the first 20-some issues of the Silver Age X-Men, and then the first 3 trades of the Chris Claremont stuff, which goes from Giant Size all the way right up to the start of the Brood Saga.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved them, read them front to back, never touched them again. Just never got into comics, didn't know how to buy them. And when I went to college, they were starting the Schism event was just ending for X-Men, where they split up the teams between Wolverine and Cyclops. And I said, okay, I like Cyclops. Magneto's on this team. He seems pretty neat. Let's just go all in. And got into it, really started enjoying comics, and kind of haven't looked back since.
I just want to say that is like low-key actually a pretty good time to jump into X-Men comics, because Wolverine the X-Men came out of that, and I love that book, personally.
See, I didn't read it. I went Team Cyclops.
Oh, yeah.
And the problem is I found out later in life that Chris Bachalo was my favorite artist of all time. So, I hacked up bigly.
No, I mean, that's understandable. I mean, you followed the person that you liked the most at the time, so that makes sense. But we were talking about before we started recording, one of the things that I think can prove hugely valuable on the internet today is like owning a niche. And like that's one thing that I'm super envious of you of, is because I don't really have a niche. I'm just like this guy, and we were talking about it before. I do interviews with people of all walks of life. I do talk about the business of comics sometimes, but it's not really like a specific niche. I feel like because X-Men fans are so passionate, and like you give them a place to go, and you have a definitive rankings, which is not definitive whatsoever. I do want to note, not definitive.
Fair. Look, the internet loves lists. The internet loves lists. If you tell someone something's better than something else, they will argue with you, but that's engagement. That is clicking on content and getting people in there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's fun.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that like a list like that is perfect at like simulating the comic shop conversation, like the ideal version of the comic shop conversation. But yeah, I mean, owning a niche, I think that's super important today. And like, that's awesome. I'm glad that you found a place to like kind of get in there, because I don't know, X-Men is a fertile land to talk about.
Oh yeah, there's the thing I've always thought about X-Men is that, you got the big two, you got Marvel and DC. And out of those, I don't think there is anything that could stand on its own outside of X-Men. Like you couldn't just be a company and be like, we're going to publish Spider-Man. I don't think you could build an entire line about it. I don't think you could build like a cinematic universe out of it. Even, no matter how hard Sony's going to try. I do think X-Men, with as deep and as weird as it is, you can do that with it and not run out of content. There are hundreds of X-Men. And the one thing I've learned, every character and every story is someone's favorite.
Oh, yeah.
It's absolutely bizarre to me that there are people who will go through like the Chris Claremont Extreme X-Men run and say, oh yeah, this arc, this is one of my top 10 arcs of all time. And I'm sitting there like, I hated that. I just sped read that. I just kind of got through it to say I was done. You love it? Okay, good for you. But the beauty of X-Men is there's content for that. Everyone can find their niche, and it's awesome. It's my favorite franchise because of that. There's something for everyone.
Yeah, you're living proof of that. Isn't your favorite character Maggot?
I wouldn't call him favorite. I think that was a joke that kind of got out of hand, and then I've just embraced it. I do love that blue boy, though.
My friend Brandon, his favorite legitimately is Maggot, like 100% truthful. Like, he loves Maggot. And the sad thing for him is like, a Maggot fan is often in a deep, deep drought when it comes to Maggot-related content. And so, mercifully, like for him, Age of X-Men, boom, Maggot, he's back. So
Maggot's been in stuff this year. Maggot has been in 3 comic books this year. It has been 1 issue of Cullen Bunn's X-Men Blue, 1 issue of Matthew Rosenberg's New Mutants, and 1 very, very choice appearance in the Domino Annual, where he got mad in a support group because there he was sitting there and he dropped barbecue sauce on him, which was a reference to a Vine that I did not watch. But apparently it was very good. It was. I have been campaigning to bring back Maggot for a long time because the reason he's not my favorite, like the reason I can't say, oh yeah, he's my favorite, because there's just not enough to him.
Yeah.
Like the Joe Kelly, or not Joe. Yeah, Joe Kelly, and I'm forgetting Siegel. The Siegel and Kelly era of X-Men, it was just too short. It was 10 issues. And there was so much potential there. It was saying, hey, we're going to try to do with the most popular franchise in the world. And fans didn't love it at the time. But you go back, and there's so much good stuff there, which is why I want Maggot to come back, because I think he has a lot of potential to be weird and cool.
100% a fact. Well, let's jump into like some weird and cool comics from this month. Let's get into the off-panel book club part. So we're going to start with both of our 5 favorite comics of the month. I'm going to let you kick it off, but you can either go, I don't know if you ranked yours or ordered yours at all, because,
I did.
You did not?
No, I did.
Okay, I did too.
About it this morning, but I did knock them out into 5, 2, 1.
Let's do reverse order. You start with your number 5. We'll do snake draft style.
If I can be sneaky, can I throw in an honorable mention that I didn't read because Comixology screwed up?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
There is a book, and I knew it was going to be in my top 5 if it actually would have come out on Comixology, which is Come Into Me, coming out of Black Mask Studios. Zach Thompson and Lonnie Nadler have been doing it. Number 4 was supposed to come out Wednesday. It came out in print. Something got screwed up on the Comixology thing, but it is this fantastic psychological body horror thriller that the first 3 issues have been absolutely astounding, and no one is reading it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely no one's reading it. So people should check that out when it comes out. I assume number 4 is very good, but I can't physically read it yet, or digitally. However.
Wait, really quick. I'm going to give an honorable mention really quick, too. This is just to Chip Zdarsky's story from the Wicked Divine Funnies issue, in which he depicts how Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey met Matt Wilson. And it involves, pretty sure it involves murder and Jamie McKelvey being basically a street tough from a like part of England in which they have a crazy accent. And it's pretty amazing, and it's nonsense, but I love it, and Chip Zdarsky is amazing. So that's my story. What's your number 5?
My number 5 is Astonishing X-Men number 17 by Matt Rosenberg and Greg Land. Matt Rosenberg jumped on Astonishing X-Men for a 5-issue arc with a weird team led by Havoc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this has been Rosenberg, who's a creator I really like. This has been his most successful work in the X Office. It tells a very complete story, a very heartfelt story that both pulls into continuity and speaks really true to a group of misfits, a group of characters that really shouldn't fit together. It's like Havoc and Colossus and Dazzler and Beast and Banshee and Warpath.
Right.
Like that's not a team that should really work. There's not a lot pulling them together, but it absolutely did. Greg Land's doing art on it, and I'm not a huge Greg Land fan, but he's doing nice, clean, serviceable work here. There's nothing that's historically distracting about Greg Land in this comic, so that worked out for me.
You know, the funny thing about Greg Land is like, I feel like if the first time you meet Greg Land, you're going to really, really love his work, because it's just like, it looks like nothing you'd ever seen in comics before. And then every time you see it, it's like, it kind of seems the same. But the funny thing is if you look really far back when he was doing like Nightwing in the 90s, he actually did some really nice stuff. And I think that if he gets away from the super obvious photo reference stuff, he's not bad. So I'm not surprised if like he brings serviceable Greg Land work to the table. Like it's good. I've heard good things about his stuff on Astonishing. My buddy is a fan of the stuff he's done there.
I've been saying for a while now, get Greg Land on like a Transformers comic.
Oh yeah.
Where you know, just the weird too large of smile faces can't happen.
Right.
Let him draw giant robots and monsters punching each other.
Right.
And you're going to get a damn good comic book.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, it would take away from the obvious, like, you know, remember when he was on Uncanny and everyone was pointing out like the huge smiles that Cyclops had, and there was like the Triple H reference and stuff like that. If you did the robot thing, then I mean, maybe it'd be harder to point out the photo reference, and also it just kind of would fit his style better. I mean, it's very glossy.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I'll do number 5 and then 4 because we're gonna go snake draft. My number 5 is Cemetery Beach number 3 from Warren Ellis and Jason Howard. First off, I'm just a huge Warren Ellis mark, and I love Jason Howard as well. The thing I really like about this book is the fact that I like books that zig when everybody else is zagging, and this entire issue is basically just an action sequence. But at the same time, like the limited dialogue that they do have is, I don't know, I feel like the fact that the rest of the issue is basically the two main characters being chased through this wild, crazy world. I feel like the fact that they do that makes the limited dialogue they have stand out all the more. And it's just, Jason Howard is such a like talented visual storyteller that it really makes the whole thing pop. And he has some like really like fascinating color choices that really make all of the action sequences and all of the story beats just really, really work. He uses color to like bring your attention to certain things really, really well. I don't know. I mean, I appreciate somebody who can take a limited color palette for a planet and like even for this book and still make it work in exactly the way you want it to. It's just really powerful stuff. And like the final message is like the final panel is like a huge like basically F you to the way that the world actually works. So it's like, it's a brilliant action comic that also has like Warren Ellis being a grouchy man, and I love it. So that's my number 5.
I'll tell you, there's not a single writer that, if someone said, give me a book that's a full action sequence, just 20 pages of an action sequence, Warren Ellis is the number one on that every single time, between what he scripted on Moon Knight and what he did for Next Wave. And obviously his artists carried a bunch of the weight there.
Right.
But he got someone good on that. He can script out some action beats that are going to be absolutely killer.
Do you feel like he kind of, I mean, I know you came out on Schism, but it sounds like you've read back quite a bit, but do you feel like Warren Ellis kind of is always moving in the opposite direction of the trends of other writers? Because that's kind of how it always feels to me.
Yeah. Warren Ellis, he's an interesting pick for me. Like his Moon Knight run, 6 of my favorite issues of comics. Mm-hmm. Period. I think as a trade of this is what comics can be, you hand that to anyone, it's perfect. It just works. I think he can do some weird stuff that doesn't always work for me. Especially some of his lazy Warren Ellis can just be grouch, transhumanism, grouch, some cocky British remark. And I don't love that, but most of the time he really hits for me, and he's at least always interesting. And I think that's a real asset.
It helps that it helps the last point that you were making, that a lot of his weirdest and, in my opinion, least effective work was actually X-Men work.
Oh yeah, he sucks at X-Men. Like the best thing Warren Ellis has ever done with X-Men is the stuff where he kind of gave X-Man, Nate Gray, a new direction.
Where's
and having just read that recently, it's not good, but it's fine.
It's
fine.
interesting.
I mean, it's an interesting concept. Execution may not be there.
Okay, it was interesting when I was 14.
And that's what X-Man is, but we're going to get to that.
Oh, we're definitely going to get to that. I have some ranking slander to throw your way involving X-Man. All right, my number 4 is Kaiju Max from Oni Press and by Xander Cannon. Long running, one of my favorite comics. It was funny, it didn't actually make my initial list, and then I was rereading a bunch of books in a bath, as an adult does. And which is a terrible choice. Why would I read print comics in a bath? Terrible choice. But anyways,
I mean, yeah, no.
I you know what? No damage. And also, my CGC grader was in there just to make sure that I didn't damage anything. Thank you, CGC grader.
Perfect.
But anyways, the comic, I don't know if you read Kaiju Max at all, but
I have not. I've been waiting on that one though.
It's a really fascinating book because I feel like people discount it based off of Cannon's art style and the fact that it is kind of cartoony. But the thing is it works really well because it's such a counterbalance to some of the weighty issues that when there's like a big moment, it hits so hard. And this entire issue, like it's on season 4 right now, which is taking place entirely in like the women's wing of the prison, the Kaiju Max prison. And like the final beat in this issue is such a gut punch to like the current main character in the book and also to the reader that it is just astonishing. And it's also built off of like 3 seasons of this book already. But it's just like, I don't know. It's masterful long-form storytelling. It's masterful short-term storytelling. And it's just really, really smart. And plus, like, Xander Cannon has just such a gift with really weird gang slang for kaiju. Like, that's a speaking of niches again, that's a really specific niche. He owns the living hell out of it. I mean, I never thought I'd want to read a comic that was Oz mixed with kaiju, like, I don't know, Godzilla. But, man, he is killing it. So yeah, that's my number 4. That book is always near the top of my list. It's been coming out a little bit less frequently lately, but that issue was just a stunner. I loved it.
I'm gonna have to check that out. That's been one of those that I've been sitting there on Hoopla, like, should I rent this one this month, or should I just go read all of Astro City? And I went the other route, which is good choice. Astro City is actually the best comics I've read in November. They are very old, but they are perfect.
That is not an inconsiderable dive, though. I mean, that's like 100+ issues. That's like when I'm like, oh, I'm going to start a new manga series. I'm like, oh my God, my entire life has been taken over.
I didn't realize it, but it's all super good, so I'm not that mad.
Yeah, that's true.
Turns out Kurt Busiek knows a thing about comics. who knew?
Yeah, that's. I mean, he was writing letters to superhero comics in like this like 70s, saying about how this is what the thing you should do with these characters. And clearly he had ideas, which thankfully he has employed into his own long-running creator-owned series about superheroes. So, yay!
Yeah. Kurt Busiek's the guy that had Jean Grey come back from a cocoon because he sent a letter to John Byrne, and he was like, "Oh, that's a good idea."
I'm going to take that. That's good. I like it.
Yeah.
All right, what's number 4 for you?
Number 4 for me is The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl 38 by Ryan North and Derek Charm.
Yes.
I'm a huge Squirrel Girl fan. I remember hearing that they were announcing, or when they announced that book, I was like, okay, this is what Ryan Dinosaur Comics guy is doing. I'm in. I'm absolutely in. I had been reading Dinosaur Comics, his webcomic, for years and years before that, and I said, I'm picking this up, and I have not regretted it. It is, in this story, they are trying to figure out, stop some scroll invasion that's going on. Mm-hmm. And it's just the team from there hanging out, talking through computer science. I don't want to say nonsense because legitimately Ryan North has done the work. Mm-hmm. He has like a master's degree, whatever this stuff is. He knows his stuff when it comes to it. But they are going through being very smart, playing off different comic tropes. And what I love about Squirrel Girl, month after month, it takes me 3 times longer to read that comic.
Oh, yeah.
Than any other book I get. But it's not a slog. It's incredibly enjoyable because North can do such great dialogue. And while it took a little bit for me to warm up to it, coming off of Erica Henderson, Derek Charm has proved to be an incredible asset for this book. He's doing some great work. Squirrel Girl for 38 plus, however many were in that first volume issues now, has had some of the best cartooning you're going to find, best in the big 2 at least, for sure, out there. It's been consistently excellent, and anyone who is sleeping on this series is missing out on some of the smartest comics that are out there.
Yeah, it didn't make my list, but I do not need to. I've been talking up my love of Squirrel Girl for a long time. The thing that I really think is amazing about Derek Charm, and then continue off Erica Henderson, is the fact that like you said, they are 2 of the absolute best storytellers you can get. Maybe the style's not for everybody, but they fit Ryan North's script so well, and they're able to sell the comedic beats so well. And the fact that I don't think every artist could pull off like the non-violent solutions that are used in that story, in those stories. And I love that about it. And I feel like Derek Charm has really, really worked. I was sold personally, I think in his very first issue, by his depiction of Kraven and the Kravan.
Oh yeah, the Kravan and Kraven the Hunter's streetwear.
Oh yeah, that was
very
nice.
Good stuff.
That was nice. But yeah, this whole issue, I like the Tony Stark stuff and like all the Skrull stuff. All of that was just, it's really funny. And you one thing that's you can never underrate in Squirrel Girl is how great the footnotes are. I never knew I wanted footnotes in a comic until I read Squirrel Girl, and then I'm like, I could go for footnotes in every comic.
Mm-hmm. It takes a very specific wit to pull it off. And if someone told me they hated Ryan North's writing style and his humor, I'd look at them square in the eyes and said, okay, you're right. I cannot argue with you. It's very, you either get it or you don't.
Right.
But that's clicked with me since I was like 16 years old. So I'm fully on this train.
I do, it's funny that you say that, because I actually think that Squirrel Girl is maybe the most representative of the modern version of Marvel, where they're trying to find books that very specifically speak to an audience rather than try to please everybody. And I think that it's like impossible to try to please every audience. And so trying to find something that really specifically connects with a group of people like they did with Squirrel Girl that's a super valuable thing. And I think they've done a very effective, done an effective job of doing that.
Yep, totally. So my number 3 pick for this month was X-Men Red number 10 by Tom Taylor and Rose Antonio. I don't know how much you've seen on X-Men Red, but essentially Tom Taylor has been telling this giant 12-part story since he kicked off this book. It's going to end up being one of the best trades just to hand to anyone if they want to read X-Men. Mm-hmm. He gets Jean Grey. He has found a spot for her where she has been the girl, then the Phoenix, and then no one knew what to do with her till Grant Morrison said, well, we should probably just kill her off anyway, right?
That's always on the table with Jean Grey.
I mean, it is, but if you look at her output from like X Factor when she came back to New X-Men, that 15 years or whatever, no one knew what to do with her. She was there.
Right.
She just existed. And now she's finally found this very interesting role where she's a diplomat and she's just like Squirrel Girl looking for those nonviolent solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, this is a whole thing where they say, hey, you know what? Let's stop being, like on our own. Let's get help. And she's the only one of the X-Men who is smart enough and willing to get help for their problems. And they take it to Cassandra Nova, who's the big villain of this. It sets up for an excellent climax next month. Red is fantastic. It's one of my favorite X books in years. Definitely worth checking out.
I haven't read it. I actually am now working my way through All New Wolverine on Marvel Unlimited, so I am like very much on board on the Tom Taylor train when it comes to X-Men related stuff. The only thing I know about X-Men Red is that apparently everybody fought or like went after Cassandra Nova while wearing Magneto helmets, which
yes.
I like. How have they never thought about doing that? Like, or having some sort of like, psychic dampener when you're trying to fight Cassandra Nova? Because if you take away all of her like main, psychic powers, isn't she just like a frail woman?
Yes, but to be fair, she's been in like 3 other comics.
I know. That's true. They haven't got there yet.
She's not been in much, but no, it's a great idea. When I did that page turn to see that, I was like, well, son of a gun. Okay, that's fantastic. That is evocative. It's a great image, number one, because it's not just the X-Men. The Avengers show up too. Like, that's who she gets help.
Yeah.
She gets Tony Stark and she gets Captain America, and she's like, guys, we got a problem. It's bad. Can we fix it?
Right.
It's excellent. Tom Taylor's telling he's telling a charged political story with some of the ways he's taking it. But you know what? Sometimes X-Men, a story that explicitly labels the good guys and the bad guys and labels all the bigots and racists as the bad guys.
Right.
Maybe it can be a little blunt sometimes.
Yeah. I also appreciate like what you're saying about Jean Grey. Like, one of the things about the X-Men is they quite often have like made themselves an island, sometimes literally made themselves an island. And it's just, I appreciate the fact that it sounds like she's reaching out, because I don't know, that's a really good way to make a lot of people mad at you, is like make yourself an other. And so like Tom Taylor approaching it in that way sounds really smart.
Totally.
So my number 3 is actually a book I read last night, and I bought it on a whim, and I loved it. And it's funny. It's The Warning. It's The Warning #1 by Edward LaRoche. It's an Image book. I did not. The only thing only reason why I wanted to buy it was because I really liked the font treatment on the front cover for both the credits and for the labeling of the book. This is how weird my whims of buying are. But I was just like, that's really nice treatment. I imagine I'll like the rest of the comic. And it's like one of the fascinating things about this book is I loved it, and then I was like, I want to see what other people on the internet think about this. And I went on Comic Book Roundup, and they gave it a 6.6 on average, and it blew my mind, because like comic reviewers, it's like a trope that we always give high grades to comics, and the fact that this one didn't get it and I loved it, was kind of fascinating to me. But it is kind of it's a weird first issue, because in some ways very little happens, but it's all about setup and it's all about atmosphere. And the thing I really appreciated about it is it had very deliberate pacing, and it had like an atmosphere. It, like, do you read Gideon Falls?
I have just gotten into Gideon Falls this month. I absolutely love it. I'm a huge Jeff Lemire mark, period.
Right.
I think his stuff reads better in trade, so I don't pick it up monthly, but Gideon Falls had that amazing atmosphere. And looking through the 4-page preview on image.com, yeah, I can see exactly what you're talking about with the pacing.
Yeah.
Especially with how it's laid out. It starts with like it opens up with a big splash, and then it gets smaller and smaller and tighter and more claustrophobic.
Yeah, it really
is interesting looking.
Yeah, the vibe with it really reminded me of Arrival, like the 2016 movie with Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner. And it's just like it feels like really smart sci-fi, and it's not trying to be so much to start with, because it knows like you're gonna have to build to it. You're gonna have to build to like this big event or these big bad things happening. by like showcasing the characters first for you to really care about it. And, you know, it may ultimately read better in trade. However, I love the first issue, and it read unlike anything else I've read in the last while. And I don't know, it just felt really smart. I really appreciate this artist or Edward LaRoche's approach to panel layouts, and like the fact that there were some panels where he would only really do like, I don't know, like an eighth of a page, but he would have that on its by its own and have like black space all around it just to like really focus your eye on this one beat because he really wants to hit this character beat. I'd never read any of his comics before, but it was really smartly done, and I really appreciate a new voice trying to do something a little bit different, and it was great.
Oh, look, it looks like something worth checking out.
Yeah, definitely. And next one, on the opposite end of the spectrum of people knowing it, is Thor #7 from Jason Aaron and Tony Moore, which is a random throwback story to young Thor in which Loki tries to make him hate Midgard by like ruining his life through love. And what ends up happening is this completely random, unexpected story that redefines, like, I don't know, it's like this, they've built this pillar into Thor's life that makes a lot of sense as to why he loves Midgard in the way that he does. And it's just this wonderful story of love and the power of humanity, and really the question of worthiness that's at the core of all of Jason Aaron's long run on this book. And plus it has Tony Moore art. I freaking love Tony Moore. Could always use more Tony Moore. And yeah, it was super badass. Plus it has like a Viking woman who is just straight up murdering dudes, and I loved it. So that's my number 2. What do you got?
My number 2 is Runaways #15 by Rainbow Roll and Chris Anka. This is, I don't know if you've been reading Runaways.
I have been.
But, I mean, Runaways is that comic that comic fans love to say, you know what, if they just made a comic that was no punches and all these characters sitting around a table talking about their feelings, I would read it.
Oh, yeah.
People say that to me all the time, and I don't always believe them. But then Rainbow Roll just came into comics and said, hey, I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. It's so good. It helps that Chris Anka's a incredibly gifted storyteller.
Yeah.
It helps that he is driving things. But this is really it's a one-shot that's focused on Nico Manaru, learning a bit more about her history, about her powers, where they come from. It very deftly eliminates some problematic elements of her creation back in early 2000s when we maybe did not have the best way talking about like self-harm and people cutting themselves. It was a whole trend because of emo music, and that's a bad thing. It wasn't good. We fixed all that, and we can move on. But what I love about Runaways, and it continues in this book, is every single decision they make is the decision a stupid teenager would make. And it's the decision that you know is bad for them, and you know is completely unhealthy and the wrong thing to do, and it's self-destructive. And everything about the Runaways is actually kind of bad for them.
Right.
And they're leaning into it, and I think it's telling a fantastic story. I am very excited to see where this continues. From all indications, it's not ending real soon.
Did you see Rainbow Roll's response to Oliver Sava on Twitter by chance, where she said that like, what, we're getting canceled? I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, it was a lot of relief. Like, look, I could use less money on my money out my wallet every month, but Runaways is something that I am willing to pony up the cash for.
I also really love the issue. I love that she took her, like, the manifestation of the staff of one. Is that it?
Yep.
Yeah. They went to like a restaurant so he could get food. I'm like, you would be pretty hungry after living in a staff for a very long time. I guess you are the staff, but, like, that was really great. This is not related to that comic, but I just want to give a quick shout out to Runaways 14 and the little story by Takeshi Miyazawa and Rainbow Roll about Old Lace and her like going around the mansion and saying hello to everyone. That was such a good like 4 or 5 issue story that or 4 or 5 page story that I just like absolutely adored it. I love everything they're doing. I actually have a sketchbook that is just superheroes doing ordinary things. So Runaways and Rainbow Roll doing ordinary things with all these characters is very much up my alley. So I'm right there with you. Didn't make my list, but I do love it.
Right. And my number 1 is actually a trade paperback that got released this month. And I don't know this is the first time it's been released, but it's still the best comic I've read this month, and that is The Mighty Thor, The Death of the Mighty Thor.
Oh, yeah.
Which, Jason Aaron and Russell Dodderman absolutely killing it. I don't know if I was 100% sold on Jane as a character in the entirety of the run. It felt a lot like she didn't have a specific purpose outside of like what Thor Odinson had in the rest of Jason Aaron's run. I think there might have been a little bit more that could have been done with that. But regardless, this last arc completely sold me on everything. It's beautiful. Russell Dodderman is ungodly. It's stupid that he's allowed to draw comics. I think every time I turned a page, I said, why do we even make other comics? This is so good.
Yeah.
This is so absolutely fantastic. It is emotionally resonant. It is huge moments. It is calling back to all this stuff that everyone loved when they opened up the God Butcher and the God Bomb and all the stuff that Jason Aaron kicked off his epic with.
Yeah.
It is fantastic. It's some of the best superhero comics that are out there. It's to the point where I'm eyeing that Walt Simonson run and saying, this is also pretty good, guy. Like, you guys are eventually going to have a punch out for 1-2 because I don't know where I'm feeling on this.
Yeah.
It's been great.
You know, the thing I really loved about that arc was, it fits what you're saying. It really brought the whole thing together and separated Jane from Odinson as like her own version of this character and like what she stood for and who she was as a hero. And like the level of self-sacrifice she was willing to give. She was willing to literally give her life to save like this place that wasn't even her own home. And it was a wonderful, wonderful story. Not my number one though.
Yeah.
Mine is also a trade.
Oh. Ooh.
Mine is, are you reading Black Hammer at all?
I am definitely reading Black Hammer. Again, Jeff Lemire mark.
Yeah.
Really enjoying it. Do not pick up the single issues.
My number one is Dr. Star and the Kingdom of Lost Tomorrows, the trade that came out this month. I actually totally caught up on Black Hammer because I was reading in trade just for the Lemire podcast I did recently. And Dr. Star and the Kingdom of Lost Tomorrows like wrecked me as a human being in a way that like I can't even express. Like it was... I like the amount of stories. This isn't me trying to be like super masculine macho guy. I don't often cry while reading or watching things, and this got me at the end. Like the very end of the story is such an emotional gut punch, and it's such a beautifully done moment. It is kind of funny. It kind of reminds me a lot of Big Fish in some ways, like the very end of it. But it works in like it's such an interesting look at the cost of being a superhero and how it can impact your life and how you think that all this glory comes with just more glory. But really there's a cost to everything you do and all the time you spend trying to discover new things and trying to save the galaxy and do all these things. It's like that actually ties in well to my second issue, or number 2 pick with Thor, because there's a moment with that where it's like, you think that you're just fighting, in this place for like a short amount of time. And next thing you know, 30 years pass and your kid doesn't even know you. And like, it's such an astonishing story. And Max Fumara's art is incredible. And naturally Dave Stewart is incredible as well. And Jeff Lemire, like what a hell of a storyteller and what a brilliant character writer. I love it. I love what he's done with all the miniseries with Black Hammer, but that's my favorite one by far so far. It really crushed me as a human being, and it was great.
If it helps, there's only been 2 comics that have made me cry, and Jeff Lemire wrote one of them. So I get it. He's very good at just tugging on those heartstrings.
Which one was it? Sweet Tooth?
Underwater Welder.
Okay.
That comic resonated with me personally very deeply. I thought it was beautifully done. It was great. And I've enjoyed so much of this Black Hammer universe that I've gotten to read so far. It's just like Astro City. It's a very smart take on superheroes and stuff that you can't necessarily do with a Marvel or a DC. But Jeff Lemire's taken this, made it his own, and it's just been such a treat to get to see.
Yeah, totally. Did you read Dr. Star yet?
I have not gotten to read that yet, but I'm very excited to catch up on all those miniseries. I've just been reading the main series of Black Hammer, but I know I got to pick up all of those good spin-offs.
I'm just saying, as a father, you are going to be destroyed, and
no.
I apologize in advance.
That's not good. That's not going to help me.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick break to talk about my friends at Radio vs. the Martians. Mike Gillis and Casey Doran host the Radio vs. the Martians podcast, a show that gathers their funniest, smartest friends once a month for a deep dive into science fiction, video games, horror, comics, movies, and everything in between. So far, they've dissected topics like Superman, Steven Spielberg, Akira, George Lucas, zombies, Twin Peaks, Hayao Miyazaki, James Bond, Watchmen, and whether drivers are required to pull over for the Ghostbusters. Find this podcast and its spin-off show, Podcast La Vista, baby, a celebration of the films of thespian and statesman Arnold Schwarzenegger on iTunes, Stitcher, and at radioversusthemartians.com. And now, back to the show. All right, so let's jump in. We have two more categories to talk about as far as comics. We're going to go into most surprising comic, and I mean that in a positive way. So, like, the comic that kind of came out of nowhere to impress you the most. What's your pick?
My pick is Uncanny X-Men #3 of this relaunch. I did not like the first issue of the new Uncanny X-Men. I like pretty much everyone involved in it. Didn't like the end result of it. But I read through #2 and 3 last night, and it kind of turned it for me.
Mm-hmm.
It has a bunch of just weird stuff. There's a bunch of weird stuff going on. And they're telling this big 10-issue story with 3 writers and 4 different artists, and they're moving forward with it. And I'm not going to call it perfect by any means, but they are getting into some really, really interesting territory with this that has me turn from, okay, I guess we'll just get through this to get to the next thing, to, okay, I'm excited to pick this up next week. It's weird what a weekly pace can do to that, because, all these decisions get made on a click. Do I pick up this comic or not? And I think the pace that they've been able to put out everything with Uncanny X-Men on this relaunch has been something that's got me very excited to see how they take this across the finish line for the next 7 issues. So I think it's worked out really well. It's got some weird stuff in it. Did you know that Omega Red is just a squid man now?
I was wondering what was going on with his hands. Like, they're just tentacles now, right? Or like whatever.
Yeah, he's one of the Horsemen of Salvation.
Right. No, I know that. I read the issue. I was just like, when I saw his hands, I was just like, there aren't no hands. It's just like out comes like more his like Omega Red. I forgot what they're called. What do they have a name for those?
Tendrils, I don't know.
Yeah, like death tendrils. I swear there's like an old like Jim Lee X-Men trading card that perfectly explains his death tendrils and has a name for them. But I don't have that in front of me.
You know how Wolverine has a healing factor?
Yeah.
Omega Red has a death factor because it's the exact opposite. That's how Jim Lee worked.
Yeah. Yeah, what a good idea though. I loved it.
Look,
again,
freaking Al Ewing's doing the same thing in his Hulk right now with the one below all. Like, that's a well-trodden path that always works.
Yes, it does. So what was it about that issue that really like sealed the deal for you? Was it like the Horsemen? What was it, like Legion's like kind of reveal? What was it?
It was everything. I think everything finally came together for me personally. There's so many balls in the air, probably too many balls in the air for this book. But there is a lot of stuff. But I'll tell you, the moment that sealed it for me, there is a moment where Bishop and Iceman are fighting dinosaurs, which frankly should have been cut from the book in editing. Like, if you wanted to trim this thing down, cut out that whole subplot. But there is big mutant protests, and there is a guy that Bishop saves, and he looks at him, and he grabs his, the sign that he was picketing with, and he just says, you dropped your sign. And the sign just says, go home, muties, or something,
right,
racist in Marvel terms. And there's a beat, and it just hits. It's like, this is the perfect summation of what X-Men can be.
Right.
So beyond all this weird stuff with the Horsemen of Salvation and the fact that Legion is back, and at least they finally acknowledge that he really should be back, but we're just going to move on for now, and all this stuff, like, everything worked for me to say, okay, I have a lot of confidence of where this is going, and I want to see what's happening next.
Yeah.
Then the school blows up, but that's going to happen every decade or so.
Yeah. It's just kind of a thing that happens with the X-Men. They'll find like an asteroid to live on or something. I guess that was Magneto, exactly. But either way. No, it was, we'll talk about it here more in a little bit when we go to our big subject, but my pick, and I'm not going to go too deep on this because I have talked about it a lot. Most surprising comic is The Terrible Elizabeth Dumb Against the Devils in Suits, which is a comic by Arabson, which was adapted for English language by James Robinson. It's an image release that is like, I don't know, half again bit or taller and half again wider than a normal comic. It's big, it's pink, it's a one-shot comic, and it is fantastic. It's like Arabson's kind of like Raphael Grandpa, except for with like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's like Raphael Grandpa with like a little bit more cartoony feel to the stuff, but what a phenomenal storyteller. Actually, it's like, this is the comparison. I'm going to say he's like Raphael Grandpa and Gary Larson combined, which is a weird thing to say, but it's just how the body types work. But anyways, the comic is basically just about a girl who gets traded to the devil by her father, and she's trying, like, basically her entire life she's been taught by the crazy boarding school women that she was raised by how to possibly survive this. And it's about her trying to make her way out of this horrible deal her dad made for her. And it's super badass, and the art is great, and I loved it. And I only picked it up because one of my patrons was like, hey, you should check out this comic. I'm like, okay. And I checked it out, and I was like, wow, this is really good. Thank you for the recommendation. So that's my pick.
Yeah, see, I've seen that cover popping around. I haven't looked into it, but it looks good.
It's great. I mean, I really appreciate good one and done graphic novel type stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to transition into the next category, most confusing comic. And this isn't bad. This is just confusing. Like, I don't really know what is going to happen with this. The one that kind of just like threw us off a bit. For me, it was the Green Lantern #1 by Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp, because I was really excited for this book because I like the idea of a procedural, Green Lantern comic. It sounded like that Grant Morrison was going to go with the more straightforward superhero cop type vibe, and that was not at all the comic that I read. It was like a big weird Grant Morrison comic that kind of very like only featured Hal Jordan in a very limited capacity. It was like half the issue was Hal Jordan, and it kind of felt like both Liam Sharp and Grant Morrison were working on different comics, and it just felt really weird to me. I wasn't super into it, but at the same time, it's like, I generally like Grant Morrison. He's very hit or miss for me, but when he hits, it's a huge hit. So I feel like I'll keep going. I've had this problem lately with some of DC's bigger books, this and Heroes in Crisis, where they're purported to be one thing, and they just read completely differently than everything that I've heard from it. So it's very strange.
It seems like a real strange comic, but I've got to tell you, like, Grant Morrison did the thing where he did something so obvious that you're mad that no one else has ever done that before. Like, I can't stop thinking about Fluzel Phlegm.
Oh, right, yeah.
I cannot stop thinking about Fluzel Phlegm, because Fluzel Phlegm doesn't catch you. You catch Fluzel Phlegm, because he's a Green Lantern who's a sentient virus, which, yes, I guess Grant Morrison did that once, or more than once. But you just get sick from him, and then he catches you. You catch him. It's stupid. He's too good at comics.
Yeah.
He's too good at comics. It's really frustrating.
There's like, that's the thing though, is like, I feel like Grant Morrison has the best ideas out of anybody in comics, but whether or not it's cohesive as an actual narrative is typically my issue. And that didn't work for me, but I reserve the judgment to say that it might work better later on, but we'll see. I don't know. What's your confusing book, or the confusing comic of the month?
Yeah, my most confusing comic of the month was The Return of Wolverine #3 by Charles Soule and Declan Shalvey. I don't know what's going on with Wolverine. I got so mad this morning when I woke up and still didn't know what in the world was going on with Wolverine that I wrote 1,000 words about what in the world's going on with Wolverine, and I don't know. It's Gary Duggan's doing something with Wolverine, Jason Aaron's doing something with Wolverine, Charles Soule's doing something with Wolverine, and everyone's doing something different with Wolverine, and I don't know what's happening with Wolverine, and his claws are hot now, and it doesn't make any sense, and I'm just like, I'm over it. I'm so over it. Wolverine's been coming back for a year and a half. A year and a half of Wolverine coming back, and he's still not back. Just have Wolverine come back.
Yeah,
have him drink a beer and stab some guys.
I understand why they did the things the way that they did, but the huge bummer for me was, like, if they just jumped off of his return in Marvel Legacy and just went back to him having a Wolverine comic where they kind of delve into whatever the hell is happening to him, what led him to driving this beer truck with an infinity gem. Like, sure, like I would have loved that because I thought his reappearance in Marvel Legacy was great, but instead there was like a huge gap, and then there was like those weird vignettes, like the post-credit scene or whatever, and then there was the hunt for Wolverine, and there's all this stuff, and the characterization is all over the place. Like, are there like 7 Wolverines now? I don't even know what's going on.
I think there might be at least 2.
Right. There's
Which
like Phoenix Wolverine, and then there's Hot Claws Wolverine, but they're not the same.
There's just maybe they are. I don't have any idea. It's ridiculous. In this issue, frankly, it really frustrated me because, like I said, I think Moon Knight's super good. Declan's art in this is not up to snuff. Like, for me, I know he can do better. I've seen so much stuff of his that is better. So I don't know if it was the coloring on this or what, but nothing felt right. It was a fight with the X-Men that didn't go anywhere. And it's just like, this is a boring slog of a comic. And I just want to get to the point where Wolverine's back and he's doing Wolverine things. So we don't have to worry about this anymore. Just stop transitioning into what the new normal is and get to the new normal.
Well, and it's funny though, because it's like, he's arguably the least complicated I mean, he is complicated in terms of his history, but in terms of his personality, he's not complicated. And I feel
my 2-year-old's got Wolverine down at this point.
Yeah.
Like, he's easy. He's got swords in his hands and he's grumpy.
Exactly. That's all you need to know. He'll drink a beer from time to time. I feel like they've wildly overcomplicated this for a character that is obviously, like, all of the reasons why people like him is very obvious, and it's just none of them are Hot Claws or like speedboat adventures with like random people. So
okay. The one thing about Hot Claws.
Wait, you love Hot Claws?
No, I hate it. I hate it so much. It's a bad idea. That said, they just put out a preview for the X-Men Holiday Special, and Charles Soule does a 1-page comic there where the caption on the last box is, I think Hot Claws just saved Hanukkah. #Hot Claws.
Oh my God. I'm backing on Hot Claws. I'm here for Hot Claws.
This is a real thing that's being published, and I'm going to pay $5 for it.
That's incredible. I love it. Okay, so this is a perfect place to transition. We're going to close with the big question for the month. And the big question for me is, we're in a really weird time for the X-Men. They have Uncanny going on. They have also X-Men Extermination going on, which they have simultaneously like 2 kind of similar feeling. In Extermination's case, it is objectively a mini. In Uncanny's case, it's like an ongoing series, probably-ish. And they feel similar. You have all the Wolverine stuff going on. You have Age of X-Men coming in 2019. There's a lot of that's like a lot of big things, and all of them kind of feel like they're moving in different directions to a certain degree. So this is not necessarily a statement on where the X-Men comics are currently, but what would it take, in your opinion, as an X-Men expert, for the X-Men to recapture an approximation of their past glory? And I don't even mean like Chris Claremont, like past glory. I just mean like draw back the readers who, love them for all the reasons that we've stated before. And does that even matter? Does recapturing their past glory even matter?
I've thought a lot about this because, when I was getting into starting the site was when all of the stuff right after Secret Wars happened, with all the Inhuman stuff and all of that it got readers antsy. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
It got people real curious about what was going to happen with the X-Men. And what it came down to for me is, think about what can make this work. And I think they're on the right track with getting there. It's just they diverted so far that it's going to take a little bit to get back to where they need. I think the first thing that needs to happen is getting passionate creators in there. And I've got to credit to the editorial team there, because they have done a lot over the last year to get the right people involved in X-Men. Kelly Thompson, Matt Rosenberg, Zach and Lonnie, uh, Leah Williams, just the list goes on and on. These are people who, being a fan is not enough. I'd rather have a good writer than a fan.
Right.
But if I could have both, that would be fabulous. And that's what we've got here. We've got people who are incredibly impressive on understanding the characters and telling good, solid stories. I think that's absolutely the first step, and they are getting there. What they have to do at this point is essentially get everyone back, because you're not going to get people back without Wolverine and
Right.
Cyclops. Like those are the two guys. I've loved seeing Laura Kinney's stuff in All New Wolverine in the current X-23 series. I think that's been fantastic. I've loved seeing the X-Men without Cyclops, because he was such a like black hole of attention
Right.
for a decade and a half or whatever. But you've got so many people that are looking for those guys to like that's who their X-Men are. So you've got to take a look at that and see how they can move forward with it. And they are doing that. I think the other thing they need to do is just get people guessing what's going to happen next. Because I can tell you, this is the first time that I don't really know where things are going. Like,
You mean like story-wise or what?
yeah, like I have no idea where they're going after this. Like they're going through this uncanny thing, and it's going right into the Age of X-Men, which, look, they're building a massive story around Nate Gray, one of the worst characters of all time.
Which is a wonderful choice because he's a great character. Just want to
Hold on. David, I'm just going to tell you, a friend of mine cursed me with bound copies of every issue of X-Men.
Blessed you mean.
I've read all 75 of those damn things. They are not good. They are bad comics. They are bad comics. And I'm shocked that X-Man is the center point of a giant event. And I'm very excited for it, which is a weird set of feelings. I contain multitudes, I guess.
So here, this is actually a great place for me to bring something up. I think one of the problems with X-Men is related to what we're saying. I think that X-Men is perhaps more than any comic, any like subset of comics, is the line that is most cursed with the feelings of nostalgia. Mm-hmm. And I think that X-Men is a perfect manifestation of that. At the same time, I said I was not going to say what I was going to say, what everyone expects me to say, but I do feel like largely what it feels like right now is that we're stalling for a reset of sorts. And whether or not it involves a Man of Hicks or anything like that is yet to be determined. However, I do feel like look at X-Men Extermination, which I just want to give a quick shout out. I actually think of everything that's been all the stuff that I've read so far for the current X-Men stuff. I like X-Men Extermination the most. Ed Brisson, Pepe Larraz, and Marte Gracia are doing just phenomenal work. It involves Ahab successfully, which is a hard thing to do. Good job by them. That's a really fun book. Uncanny X-Men really feels like, it is literally X-Men disassembled. Like that is what the arc is called. And then Age of X-Men, like it's like a alternate universe that involves like an Omega mutant. If like all they need to do right now is literally write on a back wall, like we're starting things back over, and like it wouldn't change that wouldn't make any difference because it's pretty obvious. And that ties into my big issue with what's been going on for a long time, is that it feels like everything that is happening in the X-Men isn't running in like a cohesive, simplistic direction together. Like they don't what's that?
Oh no, yeah, no, it's a mess.
Yeah, that's the thing is like I feel like X-Men Extermination and Uncanny X-Men should not exist at the same time because
they weren't supposed to. I'm gonna go to bat for the X-Men side here.
Sure.
They were supposed to end, and then Pepe Larraz took a little bit to get the rest of the art done.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that fifth issue was supposed to come out the week before Uncanny started.
Okay, it feels really weird having them at the same time, and that's just me because I caught up this week, and I'm enjoying it for the most part. Even Uncanny, I like a little bit less. The headbanging moment with Legion in issue 3 was a little off for me. It was kind of hilarious, like unintentionally hilarious, possibly. But I like that they the team feels passionate and they feel like they understand what makes the X-Men great. But I guess like it just all feels like preamble to me, and it's very it's odd. Let's transition to Age of X-Men. You told me yourself that I believe X-23, Mr. and Mrs. X, and what is the third book? Is it Uncanny that's still going to be going on during this?
So Uncanny is going on simultaneously with it. There is Matthew Rosenberg and Sal LaRocca are taking over the book bi-weekly, which it's opening up with another $8 issue, which I've got to tell you guys, you don't do an $8 number 11. That's not a great plan. From a business standpoint, I get it for number 1, even if I don't love it. Number 11?
Yeah.
Guys.
I didn't know that. That's hard. That's a rough move. I do want to say, I got to give him credit. Like, not everybody loves Salvador LaRocca. I like Salvador LaRocca. And one thing that he's really good about is being like a one-man multi-person art team somehow. He churns out books. Mm-hmm. That guy gets work done. Yeah. And so you need somebody like that, because I'm not crazy about the rotating art thing. Like, going from Mahmoud Asrar to, who did the second issue? R.B. Silva?
R.B. Silva, and then
Yildiray Cinar.
Him, and then Pere Perez is doing the other part, and then those three are going to be rotating.
Okay, yeah, I like all those artists, but it's not as bad as Astonishing X-Men when Charles Soule was on that book, because that was just
that was whiplash. That was whiplash.
It was wild, but I can't get into the rotating art stuff. So having Sal LaRocca on that, but I think it's very interesting that all this is happening, and then they're going to jump into Age of X-Men, because that just feels like another major move, and it kind of like, I don't know, declaws the rest of the books for me to a certain degree. It's just such a weird place. I guess my question for you is like, it seems like you like these new voices. It seems like you like the ideas that they're doing. What would you like? Let's say we come out of Age of X-Men and they're going to keep Uncanny going. They're going to keep those other books going. What would you like to see the line look like from that point?
I want the line to have every book to have a clear identity. That's the most important part of any time when you can think of this is what the X line was. Everyone has a clear identity. I mean, look, the early 90s may not have been the best time in the world, but I can tell you what Excalibur was. I can tell you what X-Force was. I can tell you what X-Men was. I can tell you Cable, Wolverine, all that stuff. Like, you can elevator pitch each and every one of those. Go back to this time last year, or 6 months ago. You've got X-Men Gold, X-Men Blue, X-Men Red, Astonishing X-Men. What are these series? Why should I care what's different? You don't have that. And I think you're right. I think they are stalling to get everything in line.
Right.
I don't necessarily think they're coming in to bring in a big name, because I think, frankly, they have spent a lot of, if you're going with like sports metaphors, they've spent a lot of time building up their bench right now.
Right.
They've got a lot of not only new names, but some, like rising stars and stuff. Like, they got Kelly Thompson doing a bunch of stuff, and she's been everywhere recently. Mm-hmm. They've got Ed Brisson, who's rising up, Matthew Rosenberg, who's taken over Uncanny. Like, they've got people who are proven. They've got a lot of young talent. So I would love to see books where I can elevator pitch literally everything.
Right.
From this team. Like, from the people that are working right now, I'd love to see something that is explicit on this is what it is. And because X-Men is a huge franchise, they've kind of got all that built in. Like, Ed Brisson's doing an X-Force book. I can tell you what that book's going to be. It's going to be an X-Force book, and everyone knows what that means.
Yeah.
But you tell me that you're doing X-Men Yellow and X-Men Green? I don't know what that means. I have no idea. How do you sell that to somebody saying, hey, this is just another X-Men? Because that's all those titles tell you, is this is more X-Men. And I don't want more X-Men. I want good X-Men. I want good stories with these characters that so many people are passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And I want them to mean something. I'd love to see a direction. I've seen from these teams that they are willing to make massive changes to stuff. Like, spoilers for New Mutants. You know, all the New Mutants are Warlock now?
I did not know that, so that is very interesting news to me. So it's not just Douglock, it's now like Samlock?
No, everyone is Warlock.
Well, I like that. I like Warlock. No, does everybody say Self-Friend?
They're mostly evil right now.
Oh, okay.
We're getting there. But, like, They're building up all this interesting stuff. They are seeding plot threads that are going to pay off down the line. They are Claremonting things real hard in interesting ways and pushing things to new directions. But there is so much table clearing that has to be done before that, with, like you're saying, with the O5, with Extermination, with all these weird status quos. So if coming out of Age of X-Man, you can get very clean, clear books that say, this is the school book, this is the action book, this is the funny book.
Well,
give me that.
Yeah, it's funny because like you joined up right after Schism, and if I remember correctly, that was Wolverine and the X-Men, but there was also Uncanny X-Force that came out of that, if I remember correctly. And
that was right around there, and you knew what that book was.
Oh yeah, but I mean, like they had that, like, I don't even remember what it was. It was like a transition book in between Schism and like that. Maybe it's just X-Men Schism 5, the final issue, where they like they kind of tease everything that's coming, and like. I like that. Like what they did there is they had like the Cyclops book, they had the Wolverine book, but then they also had like the Dark book, the book that has the missions that they can't do. All those books had their unique identities. It was the school, it was like the militant force, and it was like the hardcore assassin group. And like I love that. Like I think you're exactly right in that they have to give each of these books an identity. I just have two more questions for you. First off, how much, I know that you're pals with editorial, but how much do you think that identity is on editorial, like having to have those?
So one, I think pals is a strong word. I think I follow Jordan on Twitter and we joke around sometimes.
You're best friends with Jordan White.
Yeah, Jordan White, my BFF. No, I think that 100% falls on editorial. Like that's their job, is to shape the line. And I think for a while, the X offices were not shaping the line. They were putting out X-Men books because you're not going to not put out X-Men books regardless of who has the movie rights, conspiracy theorists.
Right.
But that's changing. I know there was an editorial shift about a year ago, a little less than that now. And I think what you're seeing right now is them reshuffling things, cleaning up, like, talking to the people online, and they do. I'll tell you one thing the X-Men office does that's underrated, and this is all the writers and the editorial staff. They are real good at fan engagement.
Oh, yeah.
And that gets people to actually care about these books and actually know they're coming. They do that fantastic. That's something that more comics people should do. But that's besides the point. But I know that the first seeds of what they were doing just came out in October. Like, everything else this was all planned. We got to work through it.
That was like the previous regime, so to speak.
Yeah, that was Mark Panicia's whole team. And at this point, they are going through and setting things up for what's going to happen next. So honestly, I think in 6 months, the X-Men line is going to look about the same as it does today, because these things in publishing take time. I think this time next year, the X-Men office is going to look wildly different, and that's going to have come from editorial sitting down and saying, we know X-Men has been in a bit of a rut. Like when your flagship X-Men book, and I know we talked off air about Comic-Con numbers being
right.
Don't look at them as gospel or anything like that, and I'm on your team on that. But if you're not hitting 50K constantly on Comic-Con right now, and you're the premier X-Men book.
Yeah.
Like X-Men's a huge brand. They're in the top 10 like film franchises in the world. They have a huge commitment in comics. Guys, that you need to be fighting with the Batmans and the Spider-Mans and the Supermans up there. You do not need to be down in Captain America and Aquaman territory.
Whoa, what's with the Captain America slander? You don't need to start like having friendly fire in here. What's happening?
Cap's great. Cap's great. Cap is
I was
fantastic.
just kidding. I was kidding.
I hear you though, but he doesn't have that historic underpinning that like the guys who sold however many copies,
8.1 million copies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like there's a scale difference there.
Yeah, for sure.
It's nuts. And I agree. 100% of that has to fall on editorial. I happen to trust the people who are there because I've heard from them on what they like about X-Men and what they'd like to see. And I feel like, look, we're getting an event centered around X-Man. That doesn't happen. Your bean counters don't let you do that unless they trust where you're going with it. Right. So I've got to trust that they've got some good plans coming from that.
I trust Jordan White because he wrote a song about maggots, so I'm into that. But The last question I have is I have to bring up your definitive rankings on Xavier Files. You have Cyclops number one, and
Yes.
the question is, how dare you?
Here's the thing. Here's the thing about Cyclops. He wasn't right, and I hate it when people say that. But he's fascinating because he wasn't right. Like, Cyclops is a perpetual screw-up. His entire life, since he was a small child, like, his first important memories are aliens attacked and killed my parents.
Well, I mean, whose memories aren't that? The first memories. I mean, come on. It's like a rite of passage.
Then he was gaslit in an orphanage for a while. Then some bald dude hangs out with him and says, hey, you're going to be a child soldier now.
Yes.
And the most interesting thing that ever happened is when Grant Morrison looked at that in New X-Men and said, this guy probably's got some issues.
Oh, yeah.
This guy probably's got some unresolved stuff. And that 100% flipped the character. There's a reason why he was that black hole that all of the X-Men stuff just got sucked into for so long, for right or for wrong, because he is so fascinating, because he'll screw up. He'll be the one to make the mistake so that others don't, because it's the only thing he understands. And to me, that is incredibly relatable and incredibly interesting. I think X-Men is filled with so many fantastic characters. Like, I was going through my list the other day on Twitter, and I was asking people, hey, where do you think this starts to get into bad characters?
And North Star is where you establish it, right?
I think North Star, and he's in, like, I think he's past the 100 mark. If not, he's in the 90s. Like, there's a lot of damn good X-Men characters. There's guys who are great.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, Cyclops is always at the top of that list. Though, I've said for a while, about that top 10, you could pretty much put that in any order, and I couldn't, like, argue with you that much.
I'm personally partial to Nightcrawler as the best X-Men, but...
He's very good. He's very good.
Yeah. What I would say, though, is like, you can make a very strong argument that Cyclops, his life is the story of the X-Men more than any other character. And for that reason alone, he is inarguably the most important character in the history of the X-Men. And you could also say that part of the reason why maybe the line has been a little weird is because it's literally missing. I mean, it's not literally missing its North Star. It has North Star, but it's missing its North Star in a metaphorical sense because it doesn't have Cyclops. And,
right.
And that's interesting.
I think they struggled to fill that gap. There was a lot of things that they were trying. They tried to put Storm in that role, and I love Storm, but I think she was a little underwritten when she was there. They tried to put Kitty Pryde in that role, and the same thing. They never found where it should be. The one thing I want to spin off, and I know we're running a bit long, but I do want to get this as my bold prediction for the next year of comics and X-Men specifically. You were mentioning Nightcrawler should be number one, right?
Yeah.
I don't disagree. And I kind of think that within the next year, Nightcrawler has a thriving solo series and is getting, like, pushed up into the he should kind of be Spider-Man territory.
Yeah.
I legitimately think that. I think he is the number one, besides Wolverine, he is the X-Men who is most primed to just be a Marvel Universe character that can do whatever because he's fun, he's funny. Everyone absolutely loves writing and drawing him and doing everything with him.
Mm-hmm.
And also, having that theory for a while, they announced one of the Age of X-Men books was called The Amazing Nightcrawler, where he is the most popular person in the world. And I'm pretty sure they're just going to recycle that House of M plot with Carol Danvers and push him up in prominence. And I'm here for that.
Yeah, no, I'm totally here for that too. I've long thought that Nightcrawler was like the best. Wolverine is legitimately, like, my 4 favorite superheroes are Wolverine, the Flash, or Wally West Flash, Bart Allen Impulse, and Dog Welder, because I'm a weird person.
Sure, fair.
But Wolverine he was like my hero when I was a kid. But at the same time, it's like I recognize that Nightcrawler is more, God, what is the word I'm looking for? He engenders exactly what it means to be an X-Men more than anybody. He is like the X-Men spirit come to life. And I think that's important. Last question about your list, though. The one thing I don't understand is, how is Arcade on the list, but Jamie Madrox doesn't get an appearance? I'm a longtime Multiple Man fan, and I don't get that.
Here's 100% why. 100% why.
You forgot he existed.
I did not forget he existed. I smartly decided that, man, people are probably going to pay me to put people on the list. So I just made it Patreon requests, and that sustained me after like the fourth person that got requested, and no one requested Jamie Madrox for some weird reason. And then I got busy and stopped doing the articles as frequently. So Jamie is like arguably the biggest name missing from this list right now. I've been trying to think this for a while. Who's the big names? Like Banshee's not on there, Jamie's not on there, and then like Mystique and Sabretooth maybe. Those are probably the biggest absentees on that entire list.
I would say Sabretooth is probably number one from the people you listed. But I mean, in terms of mass populace, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Peter David's run on X Factor. And so all of the Jamie and Layla Miller stuff is extremely up my alley. And I really liked, I enjoyed Matthew Rosenberg's run on Multiple Man. The current stuff on Uncanny is a little wibbly wobbly, but I mean, I'll be interested to see where they go with it. But Jamie he's my personal jam. So not seeing him on the list, I was like, what are you doing, man? Arcade? What?
Someone paid me to write about Senator Kelly before they paid me to write about Jamie Madrox. Someone paid me to write about Skullfire from X-Men 2099.
Oh my God.
Before then. I can't help it. This is the content that people crave.
I feel like Senator Kelly is living proof that there really is an X-Men character for everyone. Because who reads Senator Kelly and you're just like, you know what? That guy's my guy. All right.
I mean, look, he did a lot of bad stuff, and then he decided, oh wait, shoot, I was a dick. I should be better, and then he immediately died. Like 2 issues later, he was assassinated.
So he's like that in the line in Wreck-It Ralph that Zangief says, where he's like, just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean you're a bad guy.
Exactly. And thank you for bringing Wreck-It Ralph into this, because I've only seen that movie 30 times this week.
Well, it sounds like you had a
two-year-olds
really good
are the
week.
worst about movies. They just get real fixated onto stuff.
Oh, I feel that. I watched The Goonies probably like 200 times in my childhood. But Zach, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on, talking to X-Men and this past month in comics.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with podcaster and writer Zach Jenkins. You can find him on Twitter at Xavier Files, on his X-Men-centric website, XavierFiles.com, and on the X-Men podcast he co-hosts, Battle of the Atom, wherever you can find podcasts. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find it on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Vida Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, TJ Dali, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockhart, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Paletto, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Garino, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McCrae, Ira James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruna Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Alvino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from the album Volmilch opens the show. Give them listeners, they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.